Our next speaker is Vladi Shunturov, president of Lucid. He's led Lucid's early product and engineering teams and has driven the evolution of the company from its inception in 2004. He helped pioneer groundbreaking research in commercial building monitoring systems and real-time feedback technology. Vladi Shunturov.
Thank you, Michael. So I want to talk a little bit about buildings because that's my personal passion. This is actually the building that made me fall in love with buildings, where I went to school at Oberlin College. And it was a building that was very neat. It had a lot of fascinating systems. It also was a building that was incredibly complex. In fact, so complex that the way we ran the building used 3 times more energy than the engineers and the architects thought it should. It took us 7 years to figure out why that was the case, and a lot of data instrumentation. And so if there was one thing that I learned, it was that data is critical if we want to get the business performance of the assets that we own and operate. If there was another thing I learned, is that data for buildings is really hard. It's also really fun and really fascinating what you can do, but there's some major technological breakthroughs and innovation that have happened over the last decade that now allow anyone to be able to harness the power of data. And so the conversation for today is, what is the life cycle of data? Where does it start? How do we marry utility data? How do we marry building data together? And how do we actually drive business outcomes? Not just for the sake of analytics, but for the sake of driving the business outcomes that are important for your organization. And different organizations are going to have different priorities. Energy management for the sake of just saving kilowatt hours is certainly valuable to do, but there's a lot of other valuable business outcomes that you can drive if you can actually put your data to use and treat it like a critical business asset. A little bit about Lucid. We started the company shortly after figuring out that we can use data to make buildings work way better. That was 12 years ago in 2004. We're based in sunny California. Company is roughly about 60 people now, and we serve about 500 customers. And we work with owners of buildings and also operators of buildings. So we do a lot with government and education, really big deployments in the thousands of buildings in some cases, as well as Fortune 500 owner-occupiers and also commercial real estate that's multi-tenant. So we cover the spectrum from guys who really aren't incented to drive energy savings to guys who really care about energy savings and everything in the middle. What we provide as a business, just so you can understand why data matters to us, is solutions to several different stakeholders. We have a solution for the energy management team and facility management team, which are energy analytics. We offer a compliance automation solution for sustainability. We also offer engagement for your tenants, for your occupants, for your students, for the people in the building. That's really important in leveraging them and being successful stewards of the infrastructure. And then we also have a solution for finance people because they write the checks, and they need to know that when they write the checks, there's ROI and there's payback. They need to be able to budget and plan, and they need data for that. And finally, we also support the needs of multi-tenant portfolio managers because their needs are different. They also depend on a lot of data. There's a lot of moving pieces. But the common theme, again, is that all these applications that we provide on top of our platform do require easily accessible and simple data to work. And in buildings, that is only now becoming the norm. But if you look at other industries, and certainly how other industries are innovating, assets like modern vehicles are reporting data to the cloud every single second, and the companies that build those assets leverage it to improve their business and figure out how to build and maintain a better product. That's beginning to happen in buildings, but it's not quite there. The staggering thing, though, is that when you look at buildings, we're talking about assets that are 100 to 1,000 times more valuable, and yet we don't actually know how they perform. We have no idea, and most of the time they underperform between 15 to 30% on average. And so there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a fair amount of complexity in building data. So buildings generate huge amounts of data. It's everywhere. It's coming from utility bills. It's coming from smart meters. It's coming from building automation systems, your sub-metering systems. You have distributed generations, car chargers, work orders, leasing system, tenant systems, occupancy sensing, security systems, et cetera. And so over time, buildings used to be just a shell, but they are now a system of systems, and they're very, very complicated to manage. And the tools that you need to manage commercial real estate have changed. It used to be a tool belt, now it's an iPad. And so you got to be able to have the infrastructure to support your team and make sure that they can actually manage the portfolio effectively. And so as we look at the different types of building data, I just wanted to highlight why they're important and how they're valuable and what customers use them for, because there's a lot of generic talk about data-driven building management, but there's not as much focus on use cases, actual business use cases. So if you look at utility bill data, which is one key problem that UrgentNet solves, and bless their hearts for doing that, because that's really, really hard work. Usually customers use that information because they want to understand their costs, they want to understand if they're on budget, they want to understand their transmission charges, their distribution, their peak demand charges. They want to figure out the cost levers and figure out if they can somehow change the cost structures and the cost levers for their buildings. It's also the ultimate truth is the utility bill. That's what we trust and validate against, assuming that the utilities do the math correctly, which they try and do. The smart meter data, which increasingly is becoming available, certainly in bigger utility territories, is really interesting because you're moving from a scenario where you get 12 readings a year to a scenario where you get 35,000 readings a year. So you have a lot more time resolution of what's actually happening in the building, when and how. And so you can use this for energy management. Real-time submeters produce even higher granularity data, but it's real time. So smart meters only send us the data a day late. So if you're using it to solve real-time problems, you sort of need real-time data. So a lot of companies and building owners would invest in real-time submetering to do that. And then there's the building automation system, which has hundreds and thousands of data points, anything from the temperature in this room to how much airflow is coming from the VV boxes and is the room occupied or not. That's the building logic. That's what drives how the building actually works. And there's a lot of solutions that can learn from all the data and tell you that your building is not in fact set up the way it should be, and there's a better way to set it up. There's generation. You want to make sure you're net zero, or you want to make sure you're tracking towards net zero because you have sustainability goals. You need the data from those systems to tell that. And then there's a lot of low-cost sensors now available from IoT technologies that bring down the cost of data acquisition and sensing, temperature, occupancy, counting people, video analytics that are really neat. And finally, the stuff that we all love dealing with is manual data. Spreadsheets, meters that aren't automated that you got to read, work order reports from certain systems. So those data sets you got to incorporate as well. And finally, it's your financial, the rates you're on, what tariff structure you have, your budgets. This is the difference I mentioned in just a minute ago, which is that monthly data looks something like this. You get 12 pixels, so you can sort of see that you're looking at a grayscale image, but you can't tell what's on it. If you look at interval data, time series data, it's about 35,000 readings. So you really get a lot of granularity. And credit to that, to this is my friend Tom Arnold from Readiness. He came up with this concept of illustrating the value of interval data, which I love. Looking at one of our applications on the platform, this is what you actually see. So this is an example of a heat map. A heat map is a data visualization technique that shows you columns for the hours of the day and rows for each day of the year. So you can see a building that starts up around here at 8 and shuts down at 8, and you can see that seasonally it goes on a lot more, uses a lot more energy, and some people leave stuff all night sometimes. So it's called building drift, when you go and change a setting and you forgot to change it back, and suddenly the building is using energy at night. That's what inefficiency looks like. You can't see that in that picture. All you can tell is that December was high consumption month. That's about it, which makes sense because December is cold. But there's actually a lot of inefficiency that you can improve if you have that granularity. If you look at utility bill data, many utilities make mistakes, honest mistakes, when they run the numbers, and then they overcharge you. And it's up to you to notice that and catch it and go and ask for a refund. Companies like Ecolva help you with that process. Companies like UrgentNet provide the data to make that process possible. What we do is we can actually marry that to real-time submetering and be able to audit your bills against actual submeter data and tell you if you're on or off and if you should ask for an adjustment and a refund. And sometimes they're substantial, sometimes they're in the tens of thousands of dollars. You also want to understand your cost drivers because you may want to invest in efficiency, but maybe most of your costs are peak demand charges, in which case you want to invest in changing when you use the energy, not so much how much energy you use. And that could be a more effective energy management strategy. So that's going to change how you deploy capital. And the goal is really this: get a building that isn't very efficient, and without necessarily spending capital dollars, tweak it so that it would actually work a lot more efficiently. We didn't spend a lot of money to get the building at Oberlin to work correctly. It just took a lot of work to figure out exactly what was wrong so we can change the settings in the control system and get it to perform the way it should. There's a lot that you can do with machine learning as well. So the patterns in the data, You can leverage to automatically detect when a building is starting up and when a building is shutting down, and how those things change over time, so that you can remove the need for a human operator to have to examine these heat maps, and you can get things a lot more automated, so that the system can actually tell you your building is now shutting down an hour and a half later than it used to be. Was that intended, or was that because you forgot to reset a setting after you held the after-hours events one day? And that's the most common type of building drift, is changes in schedule that were in reversed. You can also go deeper inside of the building. So there's a ton that you can do with just whole building information that's granular. But you can also dive in. There's a lot of IoT technologies now that would let you sense consumption all the way down to the circuit level, individual breakers. And when you do that, you can, this is actually data from the same building. This is a Project Frog building. They make light prefabricated commercial structures. This is the whole building picture. From that, you can't really tell when the exterior lighting system turns on and off because it's dwarfed by the heating and cooling system. And actually, you're doing a pre-heating strategy using cheap energy during the night. But if you separate out the circuit for exterior lighting, you can see exactly when they made a change to the schedule, they tightened it up. Actually, no, they increased it. It was tightened up. Then they started turning the lights on 3 hours earlier. And so you can now see exactly how a piece of equipment, how an asset that you have was run. In an industrial setting, that's heavily utilized because you're running production assets. They have wear and tear and have certain equipment life. And if you aren't running the production lines based on what your production schedule and process should look like, and it looks like something that doesn't really make sense to you, then you're burning through a lot of equipment hours, and you don't have a very efficient manufacturing process. So circuit level monitoring is very, very popular in commercial and industrial, especially in manufacturing. The neat thing about getting real-time data over smart meter data, and the reason why people spend the dollars to put in those sensors, is because they can do effective peak demand management. If you know what the consumption is right now, and the system has learned how your building performs, which if you have enough data you can do very easily, then you can forecast if you're likely to exceed your peak threshold for the billing cycle. For some customers of ours, that's 40% of their energy spend. And we've seen peak demand charges for a single building they're $40,000. That's half a salary in the Bay Area, probably a full salary other places outside of the Bay Area. But when you go in and you can actually get an alert going to the facility manager saying you are going to experience a $40,000 charge in the next hour if you don't take action, a lot of people are going to drop what it is that they're doing and go and run and make the change and shut off stuff, even if it means to do it manually. If you expect them to go and look at the data proactively, they're not going to do that because that's too hard. And facility operations is a very reactive profession. You're always putting out fires. So if you expect your staff to be proactive with looking at data, that's just not going to pencil out. That's the laws of physics in the building world. You need to have technology that actually tells you when you should pay attention, and then you should pay the appropriate attention if the numbers add up, and it makes financial sense to do so. But doing all this requires centralizing all the data and making that simple, because for a lot of organizations, that's actually the most difficult step, and that's where they're stuck on. Getting the data in one place in a way that's business ready, that's centralized and easy for consumption and analytics, has created so much friction for them that they haven't been able to prove out the business value and get to the next step, which is improving their operations. And so that is a fundamental step in everyone's data management strategy for buildings, is what solution are you going to select to centralize all the data? And that conversation really starts with what are your business goals? And you need to then look at what data do you need to support those goals, and then you need to figure out how do I get the data, how to organize it, how do I make it business ready so I can do things with it. The state of the art for most customers is very much manual. With the help of Urginet, we're beginning to automate utility bill processing for a lot of customers. But literally, when we go and sell to customers, this is actually a picture from a customer we pitched on, and they became our customers after this. But this is what they have to do every single month. They get the massive stack of bills that goes on their table, and it's someone's job to go and put that into a system. And then from there, they use Excel. And Excel is not a very good tool for building management. Buildings matter in a very big way. We spend 90% of our lives with them. They represent 15% of GDP. And it's a shame that we don't have enterprise software that's designed for the business of running buildings. And so that's really the gap that we're looking to fill, is get past Excel. Excel is not a good tool for running your business unless you're doing budgeting and you're working in finance. Automating the data flow is step one, regardless of the source, whether it's a building system or utility system. So the way it works is the utility somehow gets data from your meter. Sometimes it drives by, sometimes it's over a smart meter, wireless network that's node to node. And then UrgentNet is able to close the fragmentation gap that exists in the buildings industry here in the United States, certainly the utility industry, to grab the information from the thousands of different utilities and make it simple for companies like Lucid to go and get a single feed from UrgentNet. From there, we make the data valuable, we make it business ready, and we'll talk about what business ready really means. We also combine it with a lot of other data sets. These are roughly the formats that UrgentNet grabs data in, and you heard about some of these pieces in earlier sessions today. We've got someone dropping off literally a box of bills on a desk and says these need to be digitized, all the way down to scanning images, doing OCR, getting structured PDFs that you parse out, doing flat files and CSVs, and you get more sophisticated as you go to the right. You go to utility websites that you scrape. Some utilities once upon a time decided Flash was a good idea and then never really got to changing that. So there's a lot of obstacles to getting the data from the utility side. But there's more and more e-data interchange formats and really API-driven integration happening for some of the more progressive utilities. That's one set of data, utility bills. Then there's their smart meter data, the sub-metering, the BMS, the generation, the business systems. For a lot of customers, the data that they need to support their goals lives in an Oracle system or some other ERP because they're trying to look at production from different plants. They want to look at business output. They want to look at business efficiency. And so they got to have those metrics very, very handy. So that's one class of integrations we do. Another class of integrations is work order systems, things like Tririga from IBM or Archibus. The reason why you want work order data is because that's your cost of labor. That's how you know whether the analytic solution you just deployed has clear ROI, because it's not just about the energy savings. If it's creating a lot of work orders and people have to run around and service them, that can also cost you a lot of money. So you really want to be able to look at the full cost of ownership of your buildings. You also want to know, if you're in commercial real estate, whether you have good managers or bad managers of your buildings. You want to correlate your tenancy data. You want to see if your tenants are leaving you, not because of economic conditions, but because of poor management of the buildings, because their work orders aren't being catered to. So that kind of business intelligence is really critical. And up until now, customers have done it with solutions. They've had to build their own systems from scratch and use generic business intelligence solutions like Tableau and other visualizations platform and Oracle backends and so forth, because nothing like this really existed. What we're building at Lucid is an data intelligence platform specifically designed for building data and specifically designed for businesses that depend on commercial buildings to run their business. And then on top, the technology has to be modern. It has to be simple, because if it's not simple, people are just not going to use it. And if people don't use analytics technology, it doesn't actually improve your business. And so you're not going to see any value. So it has to be simple. It has to be running on mobile. It has to be really capable. It has to be tailored to the person that uses it, because a finance person really couldn't care less about the VAV box status. And so you're just going to lose them as an audience if you don't put the things that they care about in front of them. And it needs to be supportive of collaboration, because people need to communicate, and when you break the barriers between sustainability, facility operations, finance, and the people in the buildings, the occupants, that's when efficiency in process starts to really come to life. And so taking one customer as an example, this is Stanford University. We've worked with them for many years, and we've expanded our deployment multiple times there. They have about 800 buildings that they're managing. They're their own utility. They generate their own power. They have a big cogen plant. There's a lot that they do. They're very innovative in how they think about sort of campus sustainability and campus efficiency. So I want to use that as an example to talk a little bit about what does it mean to actually get the information and make it business ready and actually deliver some of the business value. And this is going to relate to sort of any type of customer. So I'll speak in broad terms. So when you get data, whether it's utility data or sub-metering data, data of any type, one of the things you got to do is map the information to individual buildings. When you get utility data, it usually is in an account level. One building can have one account, so it can also have 17 accounts. And you got to roll them up, you got to combine them. Sometimes you need to deal with different types of charges in different ways. So being able to map things at the building level so you can report and look at individual buildings is one critical piece to make the data business ready. Another one is to assign by department, by tenant, by portfolio. So being able to break up the building into spaces. Urgent is leasing this space for this amount of time for this conference. We're occupying these rooms. We know the whole building usage. We'll divide it by square footage. That allocation, being able to have those relationships and links between a leasing system and the buildings allows you to then report by tenant, by department. One department could allocate multiple buildings on a campus setting. And so those roll-ups make people accountable. If you can actually make it simple to roll things up to a specific department or a person and attribute the use to them, you can now assign a budget to them and you can hold them accountable. And if operationalizing the budget is simple, you actually can drive savings because people will behave when put in a normative setting. The other one is normalization. Utility bills get read whenever the utility cycle makes sense, and there's sort of some arcane ways of why the cycles are what they are. But you need to be able to calendarize it because businesses run on calendar cycles. People think in calendar cycles. And you also need to weather normalize it because you have different performance under different conditions. So the fact that this year we had a 5% reduction could be a fact that we just had a really mild winter. We want to see what was the actual reduction, accounting for the difference in weather so we can see whether we are doing what we should be. For global customers, currency standardization is key because they get bills in all kinds of currencies and they need to be converted at the specific day and the exchange rate of that day. Otherwise, if the cents don't add up, then you don't have a financially viable system. So being able to do that across a broad range of currencies and a broad range of bills is also really, really key. And you also need to be able to track business metrics, manual metrics, things that have nothing to do with buildings and energy and utilities. Benchmarking readiness, there's more and more ordinances that make it law for you to send your data to compliance providers like Energy Star, GRESB in the commercial real estate world, CDP. Being able to look at things like energy use intensity isn't as simple as just pushing your electricity and gas data to Energy Star. You need to know how's the building fueled and do we have all the components of energy use intensity? Maybe the building has steam as well. Maybe you're manufacturing carpet and so gas and electric doesn't cover you. You also have steam consumption, so you got to account for that as well. And only then can you truly benchmark the building and submit your results. So you want to look at benchmark readiness. And then sometimes you have commodity providers when you do your own procurement and you get one set of bills from the commodity provider, you get a different set of bills for the transmission charges, and those things magically have to add up and be allocated the right way. Sometimes there's adjustments and those spread out over different dates. So all these things need to magically roll up to a number. So when I say what is the consumption of our shipping department, you can actually figure that out very quickly, and it's an accurate number that incorporates everything that went into that number. And finally, the system needs to be fully auditable. So you need to know if someone changed the record because the data was erroneous. You need to know who did it, why they did it, what data did it on, what they changed it from, what they changed it to, and how it affected other metrics in the system. So those are all critical pieces of getting your data sets business ready. And so that's really the value that we provide. That's kind of the next step after UrgentEd solves the data access problem from the utility to data capture, which is a really, really hard problem to solve. We solve the next set of problems, which is let's take the raw data, let's make it business ready, and now let's actually build the business and enterprise tools on top that create business value. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. So the discovery process is really important because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things for you to look at is the fact that you only have so many hours in the day. And so you really want to focus the people that you do have on tasks that actually are value add. There's a lot of manual steps, a lot of busy work that happens that is not a very good use of your personnel time. And so if you look at across the team, you need to be able to enable everyone to use information to make decisions. You want to make sure that you democratize data for that process. But you also want to make sure that you do have a well-established business process for driving operational change. That may mean that you may not have a formal energy management process. That's one thing that we help with. We help educate our customers on what are best practices across the board. The same goes for sustainability. The same goes for utility bill management. If you look at much more developed disciplines like sales and marketing, there is a book, many books that you read, and the sales process is pretty consistent. That's the reason why you have enterprise software supporting the sales process, and that's why sales has become such an efficient discipline, is because there's a very well-established process. When we look at how our customers manage things like buildings and energy and sustainability, It's been a grassroots effort because no one's really written the book. And the net result is that there is a consistent process and there's inefficiencies. The good news is that if you're ready to really embrace change management, you can significantly improve the process in your organization and hit some pretty impressive results. And we have a lot of case studies on the topic and do a series of webinars to talk about the business process change that's necessary for this to be effective. Data visualization is at the heart of it. So metrics are critical. Your goals are really critical. Your goals are going to be unique, just like your business is unique. And what that means is you need incredible flexibility in being able to take the data sets, drag and drop using a library of different use case driven visualization cards, and assemble any kind of view for the appropriate person and audience and project that you're working on. And you want to make sure you can print them, you can PDF them, you can email them, you can set them up on a schedule. The perfect platform is one where you wouldn't need to log in. Information should be delivered to you. You shouldn't have to log in when you select a solution like this to help manage your operations. And so the net result is that you can really create the views that cater to the problems you're looking to tackle, and those are going to evolve over time. And we help you with that, but there's also best practices, and many of our customers teach us how they're innovating using the technology that we have built. Going beyond visibility and being able to discover where you're at are a set of improvement steps. And the thing to note is that there's a lot of different analytics, types of analytics you can do, and they really depend on the use case you're trying to provide support for, and they really look at sort of the data set that you're working with. So the kind of analytics you would run on utility bill data is fairly different than the analytics you would run on interval data at the whole building level or fault detection of individual systems within the building. And if you look at all the stakeholders, again, we're talking about a lot of different groups sitting around the table. There's some common use cases. So you can actually have analytical algorithms that automatically pick out building drift, so the base load of the building, the stuff that's always on, suddenly went up. That means someone changed schedules, left something on. That stuff should be mediated and should be brought back. But maybe that number matters to you, maybe it doesn't. And that's up to you to decide. The system should tell you and learn sort of what's the threshold at which you care about knowing that there's a problem. Otherwise, there's also things like death by analytics as well. The other one is, as I mentioned, optimizing your schedules. Having the system tell you that you did in fact change the shutdown time of the building, now you know. And if that doesn't match the changes in your business, then you should go and fix that and change it. That's how you actually get the ROI. When you go and you buy a building automation system, the promise is that it would actually keep your building on track. It's your responsibility to make sure it actually runs correctly. If you don't do that, you're not going to get the benefit. So solutions like this really enhance the value of building automation technology over time. And other solutions, controllable thermostats, lighting control, this applies to anything that has a schedule, really. And there's a whole bunch of other use cases, being able to stop building drift in its tracks, managing the peak demand charges, being able to manage capital decisions better. Should you go and do HVAC projects? Should you do lighting projects? Is it better to just look at different commodity providers? Should you just move some of your buildings on a different rate? How much money is that going to save you? Today, that's a consultant-driven business. Software can do that a lot faster and better, and you can do it on a continuous basis as the building operation changes. Really important, track the ROI. The only way you're going to get money for more projects is if you can create the financial transparency and trust that what you do does in fact perform, and the vendors you're using do in fact deliver. And so keep your team accountable, keep your vendors accountable, keep them honest. It takes a lot of work to do it in Excel. In fact, it's very, very difficult to do a full set of normalizations on business operation and weather and so forth. We have built a set of apps around project M&V and project ROI tracking to make it as simple as clicking a few buttons, selecting the project timeline and how much money you spent, and spitting out your ROI report over time. And you can automate that to be sent to your finance person, so you don't even have to go through the step of reporting to him. The system can do it for you. And communication up and down the ladder, all the way down to occupants and employees. They are your biggest asset. They can help you. It's important to communicate what you do, both in facilities. Facility is a job that is invisible, takes a lot of work, and people don't see. They don't see the benefits. It's so hidden. It's so invisible. So organizations that do well are those who actually are good at communicating what facilities and energy are doing on their campus and within the company. And also all the way up to the stakeholders. If we have sustainability initiatives, are we delivering on them? If you look at Recent statistics around shareholder-driven initiatives, 72% of shareholder-driven initiatives, according to SASB, have been sustainability-driven. So shareholders care, and so you got to be able to communicate what you're doing. And so this is really our solution set to us, whether it's energy management, whether it's compliance, whether it's reporting, whether it's engagement and communication, whether it's dashboards and portfolio management, or whether it's finance. Our goal really is to build the best enterprise software and make commercial buildings a lot better than they are today, because we have the means, we have the technology, we have the people, we just haven't connected the dots quite fully yet. So that's what we're here to do. So thank you guys for the participation. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Great presentation, thank you. David Metcalf from Vedantics. One of the things that's a classic issue in the tech sector is technology looking for a problem. I don't think that is the case with energy and facilities software, but it seems one of the themes that's come out today is, to some extent, it's technology looking for a user. So just be interested to hear from you, who do you see as the kind of different types of users within organizations who are able to use the level of sophisticated analytics that you offer?
It's an excellent question, and while sophistication is one spectrum of what we do, we actually focus on providing a solution that can take customers that are literally doing nothing and take them all the way to being very sophisticated over time. Most solutions, I think for a long time in this industry, we've offered solutions that are very complex and cater to extremely advanced power users of this kind of technology that could want the world, and we've been trying to deliver and sell the world as an industry. And the world we've been selling has been too complex and hasn't been a good match for the level of sort of data sophistication and process that organizations actually have. And so there's been a massive barrier. It's really difficult for a customer that's here, wants to get started, to immediately go and get a very, very robust enterprise-grade intelligence solution, because they have no idea how to manage it, how to use it. So for us, it's really small steps. It's starting with something as simple as get your bills organized, understand your cost centers, understand the outliers, make sure you get tracking on ROI because you're spending money. And it's, for some customers, that's all they need. Over time, as they operationalize it, then they're ready for a little bit more. And they see that they can drive efficiency, operational efficiency, and building efficiency forward if they take the next step. That journey roughly takes about 7 steps, and we actually have a series of webinars focused around that sophistication curve that a customer goes through over time. We will work with customers that come and join us at step 5. We also work with customers that start at the very beginning. And so it's definitely a spectrum, and I think that's been the biggest challenge in the industry, is that we started off as an industry building technology for technology's sake that has a lot of capabilities, but we didn't have a set of users that necessarily had a training. It was a lot of people with tool belts and a lot of people with iPads. So I think the industry is changing. I think the other thing that is beginning to change is that organizations are beginning to really understand the value of data as a critical business asset. And we're beginning to see customers hiring their very first data administrators for building data. We're a company of 60 people. We have a Salesforce administrator to manage our Salesforce infrastructure. You have organizations that have more than 100 people in facility staff, and there's no one responsible for data, and usually that hat has been handed off to the sustainability team because they're in charge of metrics. So they've become the de facto owner of all things data. But I think that's being normalized a little bit more, and I think it's starting to roll into the CIO more and more.